Okay, welcome everyone. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. This is the third of a series of different webinars concerning fundraising. And today we're going to be talking about online strategies for fundraising. Our speaker today is Robert Leighton for iMission Institute. A little background before we begin. Digital is transforming fundraising. These technologies, used well, enable fundraising teams to do more with less and work smarter, not harder. In this webinar, you will learn three things. The first one being two core approaches, the engagement funnel and the strategic social network design for getting online success. Two, how to use digital data and online communications for qualification, cultivation, solicitation, and stewardship. And three, why is it still about real people and how to blend online with offline efforts to optimize results. Our speaker today, Robert Leighton, is from Yale class SOM 88. He works exclusively with nonprofits in the design and implementation of strategies, rather strategic resources. He's passionate about helping his client enjoy and deploy digital technologies for constituent outreach, development, and community building. So without further ado, thank you very much for joining us, Rob.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you, Yana, for hosting this event. This is the third, and we now have 5 scheduled. So thank you for Yana for all you do in terms of bringing the nonprofit sector together for global good. So today we're talking about online strategies for stakeholder engagement. And the agenda today is, let's first talk about what the promise is. Why do we even care? And why is this really an exciting opportunity? Two, as Andrew suggested, we're going to talk about 2 robust strategies for success, engagement funnel and strategic social networking. We're going to talk about tech tips for good, some quick takeaways that when you start thinking about constructing your digital infrastructure, these are 3 good guides. And then we have opportunities for questions. In terms of questions, there's a spot on your screen where you can enter questions. Feel free to do so when it comes to mind. We will save those questions towards the end. We've got a lot of ground to cover. I hope this hangs together. And we can get moving. So, what's the promise? Let's start with big idea, and that's big money. This is one of the 3 promises that we're going to talk about. You folks know, if you're in the nonprofit sector, you know about the Ice Bucket Challenge. That's now a good 3 years old. In the matter of 4 or 5 months, $220 million is raised for the ALS Foundation. Huge amount of money. It was not just a digital phenomenon, it was a social phenomenon, but the infrastructure was very much digital. Over the summer, RACIS raised through Facebook fundraising $22 million. This was around supporting efforts to help immigrant families that were separated at the border. And I should note that both Ice Bucket Challenge and the RACIS fundraising was not sponsored, initially sponsored by the organization. These were fundraisers who acted independently to do something that they felt was important or good. So it's an opportunity to engage fundraisers that magnify the power of your development. And last week, I don't know how many people on this call actually participated in Giving Tuesday. Looking around the room, we've got some people raising their hands. Last Tuesday, $380 million was raised on one day. That's 27% higher than it was in previous years. Now, Giving Tuesday is one day. Community foundations across the country have giving days. Universities have giving days other than Giving Tuesday. So it's a substantial amount of money that you can raise online. But 2 caveats here. The first is that it's really not clear, and it's probably unlikely, that digital is increasing the amount of money available to nonprofits. The amount that America gives has been pretty consistent for generations. It's about 2% of GNP, last I looked. And so what we're seeing here is a shift in how people are giving. So if you're in the game, and there is substantial growth, and 27% growth, for instance, there's substantial growth in the amount of online giving, but if you're not in the game, you're probably just losing a piece of the market that is really important to think about, and it's a growing part of the market. The other caveat is that online giving is really still a fraction of total giving. Of the $400 billion, $410 billion that America gave last year, probably $30 to $40 billion is coming through that donate now button. So that's the caveat. The power here, though, and what's so exciting about it, is it's not just getting your donate now button hot, right? What it is about is digital is a way to connect to millions of people. It's about being able to reach out into that digital world and find people who care about the things that your nonprofit does. And we saw, starting in 2004, I call this the DOS effect. I'm not talking about Microsoft's operating system. I am talking about Dean Obama and Sanders. And we talked about how Dean Obama and Sanders, over a period of time, refined digital outreach methods to connect to lots and lots and lots of people. Again, I'm going to stress, they connected with lots and lots of people. That was the air game, so to speak, but they also had a ground game. It was still very much volunteers in the streets, in the communities that were able to do something with those connections. So money, connections, and those of you who have donor databases that are aging out, we're working with one organization now where the average age of their donors is 82 years old. They need to do something about that. And some people may say, ooh, when they see this, and I apologize if you do have that reaction, but what we all also need to understand, it's not just about money, it's not just about connecting, it's about the power of digital to build brand, to consistently distribute your message, and to provide a vehicle for listening to what your community is saying. Say what you want about what Donald Trump is saying on Twitter, and I'm not saying Twitter is the only vehicle to work with. It certainly isn't, but he is doing we need to take note about how powerful using the digital tools are for, one, raising money, two, connecting with people, and three, moving them from interested to passionate supporters. Always keep in mind that there's an ugly tribal element to some of this, and we want to use all these tools ethically and responsibly. So while there's a big promise, there's also lots of pitfalls. The biggest pitfall I see is, and it's more true than not, is nonprofits are investing in websites, they're investing in CRMs, they're investing in social. They're not just money, but lots of time, and it really is activity that is, at best, not returning, providing some sort of ROI. Worse is that it is really draining the time. I consider it false productivity. You can get online and you can think you're doing something worthwhile, but you're really not moving the needle. So be really careful. Digital is easy to get into. It's cheap to make a website. It's cheap to get on social. It's comparatively cheap to do a CRM system, but getting a real returns is not just about buying the tool. We're going to talk about two fundamental strategies. I talked about that beforehand. Again, the engagement funnel and strategic social networking. But before we get there, it's really important, before you start getting into deploying a set of strategies, it's making some mindset changes. And this is experience from the front lines, working with a lot of nonprofits, and the things that tend to hold us back in terms of moving those nonprofits forward. And they really are organizational issues, they're mindset issues. The first is, it's a digital age, out with this notion of online versus offline. This little device here called a smartphone it's no longer about being tethered to a computer in your office. That's the online world. We now live in a mobile world. We now live in a digital world. And the way it's digital is just another tool for connecting people. Again, all we're talking about today is nonprofits, social sector, doing good. We have incredible opportunities to connect, organize, and mobilize people in new ways. Don't buy the tool. Here's the second mindset change. This is particularly apropos for when you think about CRM systems, donor development platforms. People go out and buy those platforms. They spend a lot of time and money to get those get the right data into those platforms. It takes weeks and months and sometimes years to do that, and nothing is happening yet. And then finally they go live, and guess what? Nothing happens. They're not changing the way they do the work. They're not using technology. Technology is a productivity improver. It's an enabler. And they did not sit back and think about how they're using that tool. It's kind of like going, and I've done this a lot of times in my life, it's kind of like going to Home Depot and buying a tool and not knowing what you're doing with it. So I have this wonderful tool chest of all these tools. I never use them. So what you want to be thinking about is how to improve workflows. It's always workflow, 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 workflow. What do you want to do, and how do you use technology to do that? Most important concept. And then I can't tell you how many times I've walked into boardrooms and we started talking about social. And their comment is, isn't that something a summer intern can do? Well, social is not a summer intern activity to be run. Social is what nonprofits, what we do, and what we do really well is we marshal social energy. We build social networks. We build social networks for change. So, and in fact, much of what we do in development, much of what we do in communications is about social. And so you need to think about this, and we'll talk about it in a systematic way, strategic social engagement. So 3 mindset changes. It's digital, not online versus offline. You're not buying the tool, you're improving workflows. And this is a strategic business process, just like your programs are, just like your accounting systems are. You need to think about it that way and incorporate it into a strategic plan and fund it accordingly. So let's just really quickly talk about strategy. Strategy is not a plan. If anybody now has a strategic planning session and they're getting their board together to go in to do it, and they run into planning and they don't have a strategy in place, probably want to step back. That's putting the cart before the horse. Strategy is a framework for decision making. Strategy is a framework for assembling the puzzle pieces together. The 2 strategies we are talking about is how you assemble all the digital puzzle pieces and couple it with all the stuff we've done all the time, the person-to-person connections, the direct mails, all the other tools we have at our disposal. The good news, the really good news, is the engagement funnel and strategic social networking are 2 strategies you already know all about. I'm not telling you today anything you really don't know. These are strategies that predate digital by centuries. We are social beings, folks. They are robust now, they are robust over time, and you've been learning how to develop relationships and how to connect with people your entire life. So if you ever get lost in figuring out how to put these things together, go back to the core principle of how do I build relationships? And everybody kind of understands how to do that. All right, let's get into the 2 strategies. One is for stakeholder strategy 1, it's called the engagement funnel. For those of you who are coming out of the private sector, you know this is the sales and marketing pipeline, the sales and marketing funnel. The marketing is about how do you reach out to the world out there and find the people who are interested in what you're doing and bring them into the organization and start communicating with them. That marketing activity is also about, as we talked about with Donald Trump and Twitter, is about building that brand over time. In the nonprofit space, we talk about, this is really moves management on steroids. What moves management really is the selling process. And I'm going to use the term sales and marketing in the nonprofit context because we can learn a lot. It's shortcuts for a lot of things we can get done quickly. But the moves management is a sales process. What we need to add to it is the marketing process. Is how do we bring a lot of people into that funnel. How do we keep our lists fresh? How do we keep our lists lively? So marketing is the for-profit term. In nonprofits, we call it communications and outreach. Sales, well, we call it development. I don't really see that there's a whole lot of difference, right? So let's just get comfortable. So what are the marketing activities? Lead generation. For every donor you have, there are 10 times, 100 times, 1,000 times, 10,000 times more people interested in what your nonprofit is doing. They don't get that your nonprofit is doing the work that they will feel is going to help make the world a better place. You need to find those people. Digital gives us immense power to find those people. We'll talk about some of that in a little bit. The next question is, how do you take somebody's interest and move them to the point where they are saying, your nonprofit is the nonprofit I want to support? That's what branding is all about, guys. Branding is not fundamentally about logos and taglines and colors and design guides. Those are important. That's the stuff that makes your brand memorable. But branding, a brand, is about what's in your stakeholders' mind. It's about what's in your donor's mind, your volunteer's mind, your client's mind. That's what's in a brand. It says, I want to use your organization. I want to support your organization, as opposed to the 1.5 million other nonprofits that exist in the United States. That's the power of the brand. That's why you buy Coke over Pepsi. That's why you go to McDonald's or not, as opposed to Burger King, right? That's the power of the brand. Why you buy a Volvo as opposed to a Chevy. That's the power of the brand. The other important element, and this could be considered selling, but I drop it into the marketing world. It's what's the first ask? What's the first ask? The days of saying, we do good, so give, forget about it. Those are gone. And there's just too much competition. You have to articulate to a potential donor or a potential supporter is how they can manifest their interest in making the world a better place. Now, on the first ask, there are two really important psychological questions going on. The first is independent, and this is on the donor side, independent of any amount of money they want to give. They have to decide that they want to give to your organization. That's the first question. The second question is how much they're going to give. Those are two different questions taking place in people's minds. And what the digital world has allowed us to do is reduce a tremendous amount of friction there. So in a direct mail campaign or a person-to-person campaign, you could not afford to think about an average gift that's less than $50, $100, $150. In the digital world, and we saw a race to the bottom in 2012, 2008, 2012, Obama was saying, just $5, just give me $5, just give Organizing for Action $5 and we can make change. You will be part of something. In 2016, Bernie set up 3, Hillary went to 1. What that's all about is reducing the friction about making that first commitment to that organization. And it's so, so important. So think about your first ask really carefully. Reduce the friction, reduce the hurdle, and understand you simply want them to commit to making any sort of gift. It's a big psychological commitment to give any amount of money. Once they give that amount of money, you can go through cultivation, solicitation, and stewardship. Other parts of, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, other parts of the engagement funnel, obviously the mass appeals, how you use email, how you use social, how to use direct mail to build that relationship around that first ask and to find more people, to generate more leads. And then, of course, there's the air cover for getting the repeat sale and getting the lifetime value of your relationship with your supporters higher and higher and higher. The sales process, everybody's got to think about. You need to think about building your sales team. And again, I don't know how many boards have and how many more executive directors is how do I make my board a really effective fundraising board? Well, there are some boards that are just remarkable and my hat's off to them. But for the most part, for most nonprofits, not all your board members are going to be effective fundraisers. No more than you would have your accounting department try to be a salesperson. You need to think it's a personality type, and you need to build your sales team both with volunteers, with board members, with staff. You need to build and you need to identify the right people to serve in your sales organization. Digital offers tremendous amounts of opportunities for qualifying the leads that you bring into the organization. It's not just about propensity to give. It's not just about wealth. It's not just about past giving behavior. And again, this is about stakeholder engagement. The lens here is very much a donor lens right now. This is a fundraising series, but the principles here apply to volunteers and to activists, advocates, to clients, to patrons, to all. It's the same fundamental principles, but digital, beyond just their capacity to give and their history of giving, we can begin to understand how they are engaging with our organization, whether it's in social media, who's responding to what we're putting out, and in email. It's not simply about our open rates and our click-through rates. It's really about who and what. Who is taking action? Are they taking action repeatedly? And what are they clicking through so we can communicate with them in terms of their interests, not just trying to sell our organization. Moves management, it's a process. You need to define that process. CRMs were created for moves management. That's what they're for. If you haven't thought through your moves management process and you have purchased a CRM, you've probably not done what you're supposed to do. And then finally, you need to understand the lifetime value. Lifetime value is critically important. It will tell you that you can invest and in a way that your board might not have ever thought would be a prudent investment. The other part about digital, it's inherently a very measurable process. One is it's not something you do all at once. It's something you build over time. The good news is you guys, the world has probably built many of the elements you have that you need to be successful, whether it's a website and an email platform, social. You have all those things in place. It's just a question of how we put them together. So you're going to build it over time, just like you build an accounting system, just like you build a program over time. It doesn't happen all at once. And the tip, and we do this with lots of organizations, is start with a simple campaign that you are trying to, with a clear focus on an audience that crosses jobs and functions and get people working together with a clear goal or outcome. What the engagement funnel campaign might look like, and we run these campaigns all the time. We did not invent this. Any good digital agency will be able to do this for you. And we'll get rid of that. What's critical is the marketing question is always identify the targets. Don't sell your organization, identify the targets. That's the #1 marketing question. What's amazing is the amount of audience information you can get from Google, you can get from Facebook, you can get from LinkedIn, you can get from Twitter. It's about going into their ad platforms and start doing some targeting work and setting up audiences is the term of art. Not only do you begin to think about interests and behaviors and demographics and a variety of other interesting issues that you can begin to target. Digital world, we know a lot about everybody who engages digitally, but it lets us also begin to understand the size of those marketplaces, the size of those audiences. So you don't want to create a campaign where nobody's interested. You want to create a campaign where people have an interest in something. And you might be surprised that the things that you think are important and interesting, there's not a lot of people out there either engaging on social or searching at those questions, but we can quantify that. Today is what I call a no-cost call to action. You guys are on a webinar. If Yana didn't have your email before, we now have your email and we will communicate with you. If you guys want to opt out, that's fine. For those of you who do not opt out and care about what we're trying to do, we look forward to continuing a relationship with you. That's a call to action. That's what digital affords. That used to require we buy expensive lists that we didn't really know who was on it. But this is really a good way to start qualifying it. Landing pages, need not get into it. If it's just a place where the call to action takes place, it's clean. That's all that's happening on that page. It could be a website page on your website. And there are lead gen landing pages now within Facebook and LinkedIn. You can go directly into those platforms and use those. They're very good. You need then, once you make the connection, you need to do branding. You need to explain why their interest in making the world a better place will be successfully achieved by engaging with your organization. And as a start, 3, 5, 7 emails in 30 days. And by the way, a lot of what I'm talking about here, this is a 4 to 8 hour workshop that we typically do. So I'm running through a lot of information very fast. It actually goes as much as 2 days. But as part of that, we created a learning environment. So at imissioninstitute.org/training, you can dig into how to create a landing page, how to create an orientation email series, what nonprofit branding is all about, how to do targeting. You can find free videos, some with worksheets to get you going, to get you started. So I'm going through a lot of information real fast, but you can go elsewhere to get that information. And finally, we don't just do this. We don't market simply for the purpose of building a brand. Brand is always created for the purpose of selling something or causing some action to be taken. You want to move people to some sort of action. So think about what that ask is. It may be that first ask, or this may be for folks who are low-level donors and that you want to move up. They may be volunteers who you want to become activists. Core strategy 2. Core strategy 2 is strategic social networking. Guys, I think I've already said this. We are social beings. We know how to connect with people. We're sitting around the room with a great group of people right now. In another world, that's all the people I'd be talking to. Right now, how many people we have on? Let's say we're now connecting with over 100 people. And that's a different way to connection. That's the beginning of the connection, but we're social beings and we can start connecting in really exciting ways. But fundamentally, we're social. It's what nonprofits do. I've said this and I can preach all day long. It's what you do. And if there's anything powerful about our sector, we are about knitting together. We are about creating the social fabric in our communities where people can come together from all poles in our society and work to do good things. And that is what's happening around in nonprofits all across the United States. And that what we want to think when the term strategic here is how to think about being systemic, well, it should be systematic, how to be systematic in how we construct social networks. So why do we care? Just real quick, and this is for-profit stuff. We care about social networks because people are 4 times more likely to buy when referred to by a friend. Okay, so if you're trying to engage people, you want people connected with you engaging with their friends because it's much more effective. And that when they engage, they're more likely to buy and buy bigger. What does that look like in terms, what's driving it? It's all about trust, guys. That's all about, you trust your friends more than you trust social media, where there's a lot of fake news. That's still 48%. But word of mouth, 86% trust factor. TV ads, 62%. Print ads, 60%. Social media, only 48%. But that's social media, that's not social networks. If you use social media to build social networks, you can find yourself in the 86% column. Another way to look at it is donor acquisition. You have an aging list and you want to refresh your list. Peer outreach, 1 in 4 peer outreach are likely to result in dollars. Stewarded email, that's the engagement funnel that I talked about. It's about a 5% return. If you are just purchasing a direct mail list, if you get a 0.5% return, you're doing pretty darn good. And a purchase email list is even worse. It's about 0.25%. Why would we not just do pure outreach? Because that's a limited number of people. Stewarded emails, purchase direct mail, purchase email lists, that's about scale. It's about bringing people into the organization. We can just use digital tools to make email and direct mail much more effective. So what are the 6 levels? And we can talk about this in terms of boards and events. Let's just take this offline for a second. Offline, I'm not going to talk about digital. I'm talking about what nonprofits have been doing forever. The first is, if you have a board and you have 3 people on your board, everybody kind of says, that's not enough. We need to build the number of primary connections we have, right? So we increase it to 10, and that's really good. And then we bring in some volunteers, and we bring in some other folks, and so we've built the number of primary connections. We've built our list. What happens in a lot of organizations, however, is it's a hub and a spoke. What does the hub and the spoke mean? It means that every one of those contacts have to go through a staff member in the organization before they can talk to another member of another contact. Well, we got to get rid of that. Social network, strategic social network building would be to say, we need to connect the connections, right? That's one of the reasons we have board meetings. That's one of the reasons we have social events. That's one of the reasons that boards go out and have social events together and not just do their work. It's important that you connect the connectors so they can operate independently of staff. The next step, let's say we're now ready to have an event, right? So we create nodes. I'm using social network analysis language. Today really is about getting comfortable with the language and getting a framework for starting to build this out over time. But you create bonded nodes. So think about the event where each of your primary connections buy a table. That's great. But the power is not just that you've sold 10 tickets or a full table. The power is that you've now connected with 9 more people, and that you want to think about how they can operate together. And that a lot of the peer-to-peer stuff is about teams and people operating together, walks and runs. They're teams, people working together. Those are bonded nodes. Those are people working together on your behalf. And what you also want to think, and by the way, this is why the Ice Bucket Challenge works so well, is not just did it create those bonded networks, but it gave those networks the opportunity to ask their friends and their friends of friends to act in a very specific way on their behalf. And that's one of the #1 rules of how to take things viral. So once we have created this larger and larger cluster, because friends have asked friends to connect with us, we look to bridge those clusters, and then we engage influencers within those clusters. That's a lot of heavy stuff in terms of big concepts, but what I simply offer is, in your strategic plan, you should be able to speak to each one of those steps every year in your annual budgeting plan and in your 3 to 5 year strategic plan. I just want to emphasize that, while we understand the social relationships and we are social beings, strategic network analysis is a science. It's a science in epidemiology. It's a science used in sociology. It's a science used in many social science. What this picture is really, that is a mapping of a social network where somebody has sat down and actually mapped the connections. That things like 6 degrees of separation, that came out of social network analysis. 3 degrees of impact, social network analysis. The fact that friends of friends always have more friends than your friends. This comes out of mathematical realities of social network analysis. And by the way, at Yale, there's some really good work being done. Just to comment on social network platforms like Facebook and Facebook and LinkedIn and so forth. These are platforms. And in a lot of cases, the way nonprofits are using them are much the way I might frame a picture of my family, and I have lots of pictures of my family, and I put them up in my living room, and I really enjoy them. I look at them, I enjoy them, walk around with a cocktail in my hand on a lonely evening, and I really enjoy them. But that does not do my organization too much good. And a lot of the posting that is happening, that's exactly, nobody's hearing it. Those posts are for you, not for engagement. And so the way to think about the platforms, you think about digital connectors, think about amplification committees, think about community organizing. Digital, Facebook or Twitter, these are organizing tools. And you need to think about having a community organizer to do that. I mean, my background way, way, way back when was that of a union organizer. If we had these tools way back when, and I'm 60, so but it seems like way back when. And then it's a social media channel. It's a media channel, like TV, like radio, like print, like billboards. It's a media channel, and it's a pay to play. And it's not just spending $5 on boosting an ad or boosting a post. It's about really thinking about it as a media channel and thinking about how to engage people, how to build your leads using these channels. So kind of summary on getting strategic about social networks. Allocate real resources to the process. When the term social comes up, it does not mean social, does not mean summer intern. Instill social networking thinking across the organization. When we have made that change and people start thinking about social network, we've seen lists go from 200 on their email marketing lists to 5,000, 8,000, 12,000, 20,000 names just in the course of 6 to 12 months, just by harvesting the connections the organization already has. To do that successfully, you need to think about who your community organizers are. These do not necessarily need to be paid people, but whether it's the arts or whether it's social justice or environmental justice or any activity that you're involved in, you need to think about people who are natural organizers. A little bit different from a salesperson. These are organizers. They're looking at how to create leadership and how to connect with people. And include a formalized plan for network building in the strategic and annual plans at all 6 levels that I talked about. We're going to wrap up. What time do we have?
1:37.
1:37, perfect. I want to leave about 15 minutes for questions. But tips for getting strategic about digital technology. This is kind of different from how to use technology. What are the tips? The first is who plays nicely in the sandbox? Who plays nicely in the cloud, right? Well, for me, it's a sandbox, but who plays nicely in the cloud? And that there's lots of great software out there, but that does not define what good technology is anymore. Good technology is software that speaks to each other, right? So who plays nicely in the sandbox? Well, Salesforce plays nicely in the sandbox. WordPress plays nicely in the sandbox. Eventbrite plays nicely in the sandbox. And they're obviously much bigger platforms. I'm speaking to many of the easy to get into platforms. Constant Contact, MailChimp. If you're in the advocacy space, CQ Roll Call or Salsa. If you're in the event space, Click and Pledge. If you're in the peer-to-peer space, it's Classy and Click and Pledge and a couple of others. They all play nicely in the sandbox. They all connect. They all speak to each other. And that creates a tremendous amount of opportunity to build relationships over time. The other point is break the functional silos. It's not just about how the technology connects. It's when you have a donor database and you have an activist database and you have a program database and you have all these different databases and they don't speak to each other. It is a nightmare. And then you have your accounting systems, which don't speak to any of them. It takes a lot of time and effort to non-value add activity to get important information to flow. And you're losing the power of big data is getting all that in one place. So you can begin to assess where opportunities lie. So you need to break those functional silos. If your development team is now starting to consider what CRM should I use? Well, what tech platform is right for our organization may be the better question. And then finally, if I've said it once, I probably have said it more than once, it's workflows, workflows, workflows. Technology is about how you use these tools to do things smarter, not harder, to do more with less. You can't cut a budget and say the solution is you just have to do more with less without having better ways of doing it. That's a nightmare. That's a prescription for disaster. And that's happening in lots of nonprofits today. And it's ripping people apart. So let's figure out how to use technology to deal with the realities we have to face today. Summary. It's the digital age. It's not online versus offline. It's a digital age. We have exciting new ways to connect with people and use that data that around connection to enrich that relationship. Digital technologies will continue to evolve. It's nothing standing still here. You need robust strategies. Robust means they're effective not just today on today's realities, but they're robust strategies are things that are effective in a changing environment. Those I'm offering today are the engagement funnel and strategic social networking. They have transcended the digital age. They go back hundreds of years, if not very much more. And get started. You can get started in a small way. Pick a campaign, go out and figure out who the audience is, figure out what you want them to do, figure out the steps to get them to do that. Don't just ask them to make those steps. It's a solicitation, it's a cultivation stewardship process. But think about how you link together the technologies to aid that process. So we got 15 minutes for questions. That's the first time I've given this in 40 minutes. So I hope that works.
Questions from the chat box.
Oh, are there any studies of ROI? So the one question, are there any studies of the ROI for NGOs utilizing social media? I don't know of the studies, but I do know the anecdotes because we see them all the time. What I might also suggest is the ROI analysis would probably be an average of how people are using it, not necessarily best use of social media. So there are certainly good examples of best use cases, and what I'd encourage you to do is go look at those best use cases, but use these two strategies that I've articulated to dissect what is successful. You can go into a ice bucket challenge, for instance, using social network analysis and understand why it was successful. Another question. You want to read the questions? We've got Lou on the phone here, and Lou on the webinar here. And
before identifying targets, how should we reason regarding choosing topics, issues to engage people? For example, climate change, disarmament.
And the corollary here is and that's a really that's a big question. I'm going to read the question one more time. Before identifying targets, how should we reason regarding choosing topics, issues to engage people? For example, are disarmament and combating climate change two complex subjects for targets willing to contribute funds? The answer is people are really passionate about things like disarmament and combating climate change. So where you can find passion, even though it's a complex issue, where you can find passion is where you can raise money. And so there are a lot of organizations that there are two types of organizations, and you got to understand what your voice is when you go out to market. There are nice organizations like the American Red Cross, like the Boys and Girls Clubs, like a lot of like the Salvation Army. They're nice organizations. They appeal across the spectrum. So they want to be careful about taking jumping onto emotional topics. National Rifle Association, another, that's an example of an organization that is not a nice organization. I don't mean to say they're not a nice organization, but they are emotionally charged. Planned Parenthood is emotionally charged. ACLU is emotionally charged. Southern Poverty Law Center is emotionally charged. So you need to figure out in your voice, do you want to be a nice organization or an emotionally charged organization? You can be successful in both places, but it's really difficult to be successful as an organization with both positionings. And targeting, just I should also note, you want to use social tools and search tools, Google, Facebook, LinkedIn, they're ad tools to think about how you target. You don't have to spend any money. We used to spend tens of thousands of dollars to get market research, to do focus groups, to do, not that you're not going to still do that in some cases, but we used to spend so much money before we move forward, particularly if you were going to do a big direct mail drop. You would really assess this. All this data is free, zero. What a tremendous opportunity. It's just figuring out how to use it well.
What is the effectiveness of newsletters in fundraising? What is the
effectiveness of newsletter in fundraising? Well, that's partially a question of how good is your content. So people ask me, oh, well, what's the right number of emails to send? I said, what's the value of your content? If you have good content, I get the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times every day. That's really good content. If you send me boring information about your organization with a subject line that says, our October newsletter, I'm probably not going to be all that engaged. But what's really important is if you have good content, newsletters are the air cover, not just for making the online ask, but they are clearly the air cover for staying connected with people. So when your development team goes in and has a conversation, the individual has an understanding of what your organization is doing. And we actually see this happen in real time. Thank you for the call. I got your emails. I got your newsletter. I understand. And we actually also assessed that these people were opening the emails and they were clicking through on the emails, newsletters as well. So that's important. The other thing about newsletters that are really important is keep them simple. Newsletters, you should be creating content in lots of different places. You're creating content on social, you're creating content on blogs, you're putting out direct mail pieces. Nonprofits have libraries of great content, and you don't need to create all new content all the time. You can repurpose the content, go back into your archives and repurpose them. But the newsletter today is a scrolling document that's very simple with click-throughs. Think about headlines and 150 words max per story, and let people click through if they're interested. It makes making newsletters much easier. Can you share some examples of who is doing this well? Oh, yeah. So I think if you organization called Environmental Working Group, I think does it really well. You know, what's a really good site to see who's doing all this really well is Go Red for Women. Go take a look at that. So if you want to think about, if you looked at, you can still look at the American Heart Association homepage, and it's really confusing. You don't know what's going on. You go look at Red for Women. Everybody kind of understands what that is all about, right? Go Red for Women. And you look at it, and there are a bunch of, I apologize, it's not a bunch of, but there are a group of women dressed in beautiful red dresses. They look beautiful, they look happy, they are connected, and that there are many, many, many ways for people to connect online and offline. So great example, Go Red for Women. Take a look at that. That may be one of the best out there. Environmental Working Group is also good. The other question, could you talk a little more about Organizational?
Of the organizational platform and which platforms play well with other, with financial, accounting software,
Oh,
the Salesforce.
yeah.
Which ones play well in the sandbox?
Yeah. So, Salesforce is, so there's a couple comments I have how to think about that. So why Salesforce is such an incredible, and I mean, we were tech agnostic for a lot of years, but we just become a Salesforce house. And why it's so amazing is that if you look at Razor's Edge and the Blackbaud and the donors, they are exclusive to the nonprofit space, right? So the ability to amass lots of energy to keep pace with what's going on in technology and to constantly improve it, nobody can do it as well as Salesforce. So it's not just about where you are today, but where that technology is going to be tomorrow. On the accounting side, QuickBooks is getting to be pretty good in terms of its integrations. Intact is quite good. And that's a good nonprofit software. And I believe AccuFund, I haven't used AccuFund, but I've heard that the integrations on the accounting side are also good. But again, if you are in advocacy, there's advocacy, there's development, there's accounting, there's programs. And by the way, the other huge advantage to a platform like Salesforce, and by the way, Salesforce, I think it's exciting, but I think the up and comer here is Microsoft, because they are quickly moving up to speed on all of this. Well, what else we have?
Can you discuss the change management piece of piloting new engagement? How have you driven collaboration within organizations with digital tools that are also used to convene external audiences?
That's a really good question, and it's certainly not a simple answer, and it really depends upon, I've been in lots of different organizations with lots of different dynamics going on. So part about change management is make sure it's resourced properly. Whatever you're trying to do, make sure that people have the time to do what they're trying to do, that they've been trained to do what they're needing to do. And that there is an internal champion that's respected, by the way, an internal champion to make sure the pieces are coming together. And then the champion needs to have a degree of authority. I mean, when you're talking about engaging outside audiences, organizations can be peculiar about that. And we need to understand what the voice is ahead of time and how we're going to go to market with that. And so there's lots of examples, by the way, of redesigning websites that we've been involved with, and people are fighting over the brand. And when I say fight over the brand, it's not just design issues, but it's fighting over what the organization is really about when they're designing the website. And that's a painful, painful process. So it's really understanding what you stand for and where you're going, and you'll have a whole lot more success that way. I think we have one more, right?
Oh, just kidding. In your work with diverse organizations and cultural groups, have you noticed any nuances in what digital communications work best?
In my work with diverse organizations and cultural groups, digital nuances. You know something, and I'm not so sure I'm sensitive to that. And that's a really good question, and I have to think about it. Any other questions?
What are the best, most trusted, secure, with the lowest admin fees, platforms for online giving?
there are a lot of trusted and there are a lot of secure sites. If you're looking for the lowest fees, you also want to ask, what are the capabilities, right? What are you trying to do? So I don't use a lot of the standalone platforms personally, but in the Salesforce world, we use Click and Pledge quite often. It's a very solid system that's been around. It's a little clunky. It's a little old. I think they're bringing it up to speed. And that if you are looking just for a payment platform processing, I think it's like $25 a month and 3.75% on the transaction. And that's rather low. It's a good tool. But getting the integrations work are straightforward, but you need some expertise there. But again, making the investment, these are investments in your work processes to do them better. So don't shirk on spending some money there. If you care about peer-to-peer fundraising, Click and Pledge has that capability as well. I don't think it's best in class. They say they're coming out with some other tools or an upgrade of their tools. But if social fundraising is really what you're after, Classy is probably the more intuitive platform. It's a better platform. So. And there's no shortage of stuff. If you're in a Salesforce world, there's the App Exchange, Salesforce App Exchange, which the power of people who play nicely in the sandbox is you have people all over the world writing software or platforms or tools or apps that integrate well. So you don't have to wait for, oh yeah, we're thinking we'll have that, and they don't have it for years to come. Because if there's a demand for it and it's big enough, somebody in the cloud will develop it. And again, I think Microsoft is coming along fast in terms of what we're going to see tomorrow. They're going to give Salesforce a really good run for their money.
Other question? Small initiatives that are not in a position to be a 501c3 status, yet can be hosted by groups like philanthropic ventures. They take a cut, people donate through them. Is this advisable?
I guess it depends on how big the cut is. I don't know philanthropic ventures offhand, but if you're a small venture and you have a community foundation, or you have an organization that's doing something that a nonprofit in your community that's close, find a fiscal sponsor. You don't need these platforms. They could be your sponsor, and they can take donations on your behalf and provide you with those funds. That typically comes with administrative costs, but be mindful of the fact that you're developing a good relationship with people that you may want to grow and blossom and be part of your social network over time. Again, that's an example. That's a really good example of social network thinking, that if you didn't think in terms of social networks and who you want to be connected with and who you want to work with, you may end up with somebody that is an additive to what you're trying to do.
You've mentioned mining Facebook, etc., ads for targeted audience development. How do you actually access that kind of data?
So how do you access the Facebook data or the Google data? Right now, everybody should go online and sign up for AdWords Express. It's a simple version of the AdWords platform. AdWords platform gets very complicated rather quickly, but you can still mine lots of data. So go to AdWords Express, go through the plug and play process, create an audience, and see what you come up with. In Facebook, you need to create, if you just go and create a ad in Facebook, and I recommend that everybody create a business manager page if they're serious about this. But anybody who is boosted, you will see the opportunity to access creating audiences. And they create audiences on the basis of behaviors, interests, demographics, geography. and lots and lots and lots of information. I think we are at 1 o'clock now. Anybody with any other questions, feel free to contact us at iMission Institute. We're happy to help you move your mission along. And I thank everybody for coming today. So have a good day, and let's change the world for a better place.